we're going to look at fractions, decimals, and percents, which are all equivalent ways of writing parts of a whole. So all three of these represent parts of a whole. A percent, the word percent, means per 100 or divided by 100. So for our first example, let's change 45% to a fraction. Well, 45% means 45 per 100 or 45 out of 100. So we've written this now as a fraction, and then we can reduce this fraction by dividing the numerator and the denominator by 5. So that turns out to be 9/20. I can also change this percent to a decimal. And there's two ways of looking at it. Since 45 per 100 means 45 out of 100, and I would read this fraction as 45 100ths so I can write the decimal the same way I would read the fraction. So 45 100ths as a decimal would be 45 100ths. Or I can consider it this way. What if I were to take 45%, drop the decimal place, drop the percent sign, I'm sorry, and the decimal would be here. And since per 100 means divided by 100, to divide by 100 just means I move the decimal place back 2 positions. So 0.45. So I can drop the percent sign and then move the decimal 2 places to the left. And that's another way to change a percent, in this case 45%, to a decimal. So we've looked at changing a percent to a fraction by writing percent as something out of 100 and reducing. Then we could also change a percent to a decimal either by going to the fraction and then rewriting it, or by dropping the percent sign and moving the decimal 2 places to the left. Suppose I start with a decimal and I want to go to a fraction. And then I want to also look at changing a decimal to a percent. So suppose I want to write 60/100ths or 0.60 as a fraction. Now, since I would read this as 60/100ths, I will write the fraction the same way I read the decimal, 60/100ths. And then I merely reduce the fraction, and I can divide the top by 20 and the bottom by 20, and this turns out to be 3/5. Now suppose I want to write 0.60 or 0.60 as a decimal. I'm sorry, as a percent. It already is a decimal. Okay. So I can do the opposite of what I did in the previous problem, and I can move the decimal two places to the right and add a percent sign. So move my decimal two places to get 60 and add the percent sign. So we took a decimal to a fraction by writing the fraction the same way we read the decimal, and reducing. And we took a decimal to a percent by going backwards, moving the decimal two places to the right and adding the percent sign. Now all I want to look at is going backwards from fractions to decimals and fractions to percents. Now I want to change 3/8 to a decimal number. And there are a couple ways of doing this. One is to use proportions, but I'm simply going to use the definition of a fraction. The fraction bar means to divide. So 3/8 is the same thing as 3 divided by 8. So we already learned how to divide decimals. So I'm going to add some zeros here. And I am going to divide until I reach an end or I repeat a pattern. So 8 will go into 30 3 times, which would be 3 times 8 is 24. Subtract that off. I have 6. And then 8 will go into 60 7 times. 7 times 8 is 56. Subtract. I have 40. And 8 goes into 45 times. 5 times 8 is 40. And I'm finished. I've terminated. So 3/8 is the same thing as 0.375. Now, to change 3/8 to a percent. I'm simply going to work with what I know 3/8 is as a decimal. And change the decimal to a percent. So I need to move the decimal place 2 places to the right and add a percent sign. So I find that 3/8 as a percent is 37.5%. So to finish out our diagram, to change a fraction to a decimal, we take the numerator, divided by the denominator, and we find what the decimal equivalent is. To change a fraction to a percent, I'm going to find the decimal and then move the decimal 2 places to the right and add the percent sign, just the same way I do in the lower part of this diagram. Since you can see every one leads to the other in some way, that all 3 of these are actually just equivalent ways of writing the same thing.